the latest announcement by CENTCOM, they have just they publish a statement in which they're talking about the casualties in Jordan, and at least from what they have said so far, two forces were killed. One of them is missing. It means that something happened to him, that they couldn't find his body. And then putting together it seems that the casualties are two killed, 15 with life-threatening and severe injuries being airlifted to Germany, 3 to 5 on board. That yeah, they kill Medevac in, they're gonna it's gonna be somewhere in Germany. They're sending them there, and dozens of minor injuries of troops who took shrapnel and debris. And this is the basic description on their part when it comes to the casualties. What has happened in Jordan? What it was a significant, you know, blast or somehow demolition in Jordan. Here is the video, Mark, of that missile.
Yeah, I saw it.
Yeah, this is what has happened in Jordan. And looking at this situation, Mark, we're getting back to war. As we were talking about it, you mentioned that last time we talked. You said nothing of there is no way to negotiate with the Trump administration. I remember that statement from you. And basically, we're getting back to the war. The two sides are escalating. The infrastructures, they're hitting bridges in Iran, they're hitting uh, desalination plants, and Iran is responding the same way. In Kuwait, they hit a desalination plant too, at least, and power grid in Kuwait. And this is the situation right now. The two sides are somehow trying to fight back, and or Donald Trump or Trump administration tried to open up the Strait of Hormuz. And the basic, I don't know if you find it that's really a legitimate objective on their, or not, if they really have that objective in their mind. Because when it comes to the opening up of the Strait of Hormuz, you don't go fighting in the strait to open it up, because everything gonna get messy. And right now is the same way that United States is attacking Iran, Iran retaliating. Nobody's able to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. At least in the last 2 days, there were no tankers passing through, and significant numbers, maybe one or two. What is your understanding of the current phase? And let's start with the casualties on two sides. We have the attack on Iranian, the city of Bandar Abbas. If you know, that city is so important in the southern part of Iran, naval base of Iran, and they're the main base for controlling the Strait of Hormuz. That the United States tried to isolate that by attacking all those bridges leading to that city. Go ahead, your understanding of the situation.
Yeah. So, first of all, with regards to let's start back with the collapse of the memorandum of understanding. I certainly wasn't the only one that said the memorandum of understanding wouldn't last. That the U.S., as Russia has come to understand, is both diplomacy incompetent and diplomacy incapable. They are incapable of honoring anything that they agree to. And a message from the supreme leader, Mashtaba Khamenei, has confirmed that he has now reached the same conclusion, that the U.S. Signature on anything of any U.S. leader means absolutely nothing. And the Russians have long concluded that. So welcome to the club. And the understanding now is that the U.S. simply agreed to the memorandum of understanding because they had been losing the geoeconomic game of chicken, the dueling blockades, and the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve was down to critical levels, and there wasn't enough oil on the global market, and prices were about to start jumping high. All of their months of fairly successfully manipulating, maintaining the prices. Trump posts played a part in that. Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Also, the Chinese played an important part in preventing a spike because they stopped importing large amounts of oil and started drawing on their own strategic reserves for their uses, which effectively was reducing demand across the board too, and helping keeping prices from jumping catastrophically. So, but that was all coming to an end, and the Iranians weren't the ones who blinked. It was the U.S. They agreed to the memorandum of understanding with the fingers crossed behind the back, making clear that I mean they never had any intention of fulfilling it. Their primary objective was to get a good amount of oil back into the global markets, and to restock and reload military forces in the region. Now, along with that, they moved from trying to force all the goals of the U.S. and Israel from launching the war have fallen by the wayside, except for one, right? So the first goal was regime change. Okay, that's obviously not going to happen. And then other goals like some type of deal with nuclear enrichment. I don't believe that was ever a really serious concern for theirs. That's more like the varnish or the icing on the cake. They know Iran didn't have a real nuclear weapons program, and that's just you trot it out as a weapons of mass destruction excuse to go after Iran for hegemonic reasons. And Trump himself said that it's not really that dangerous, and it's mostly about PR and psychological. He said that at multiple occasions, straight out, and no one seems to recall that he said that. So they're not actually that concerned. But other key demands that Iran divest itself of ballistic missiles, right? That has no one talks about that they stop providing aid to Shia allied Shia forces, the axis of resistance throughout the region. Hezbollah, Kataib Hezbollah, the Houthis, etc. That's all gone. The only thing that the U.S. now is laser focused on is reopening the Strait of Hormuz. And that's because there's absolutely no way that Trump can walk away from this conflict and proclaim it as some kind of victory, which he has to do both for his own ego and the reputation of the hegemon. He has to win, right? He can't lose. So he can't proclaim a win while Iran has control of the Strait of Hormuz and charging tolls or service fees or whatever for ships passing through. So with the memorandum of understanding, having failed to open the Strait of Hormuz militarily and then geoeconomically with the dueling blockades, the geoeconomic game of chicken, they switched to geopolitical or political means. And they tried to peel Oman geopolitically off from Iran, right? The way they interpreted the memorandum of understanding, which, as I and many other people in the alt media said, it was a huge problem with how vague it was, that you could drive, I don't know, entire oil tankers through the holes in that document. All of the references, for instance, in Article 5 towards control of the Strait of Hormuz referred to Iran and Oman. And so the U.S. chose to interpret that as we can deal with Oman. And that's it, right? So they tried to peel Oman off from Iran. And Oman is a tiny little country, without the big oil energy resources of its other neighbors in the Gulf. And they were stuck between a rock and a hard place and trying to sit both sides of the fence between Iran and the United States. And the U.S. was pushing this southern corridor, right, hugging the Omani coast. And they were having some success with that and eroding away Iran's leverage through their control of the Strait of Hormuz, particularly during the funeral of the former supreme leader, the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the current supreme leader's father. Remember, he was assassinated on the first day of the war, in the very first hours of the war, by a U.S.-Israeli airstrike. And his funeral was finally held, and it was, even Forbes admits, the largest attended funeral in modern history and possibly in all of world history. But Iran was loath to do anything militarily to provoke something during that period of the respect of such a martyr, as they view him. But as soon as that funeral was over, Iran reached out to reassert control of the entire strait. And since Oman has obviously been peeled away from them, they even put out statements saying, because we're in a time of military crisis, technically we have to, because it's between us and Oman, the narrowest points of the straits, it's our territorial waters. Eventually, we'll have to work out a mechanism for administration of the straits between the two of us. But now, during a wartime crisis, and without the unsaid being, and Oman being put to the squeeze by the United States, we have to take total control of it ourselves. So they're now leaving Oman even out of mention in these talks. And they took military action, decisive military action against any ships using the U.S. pushed southern corridor hugging the coast of Oman. They reached out and hit them with fast boats, with drones, with cruise missiles, and they hit. And recently they added some more sea mines, it seems, and a couple of ships have run aground of sea mines too. And as a result of that, in the past week, traffic through the U.S. pushed southern corridor, whatever CENTCOM and Trump may say, according to all the independent traffickers, the satellite data, everything says it's gone. There is no traffic through the southern corridor. There is only very light traffic through the Strait of Hormuz at all. And that's what Iran is allowing through, principally some ships to China and so forth. So the U.S. can't accept this state of affairs. And so they returned to both the kinetic action, to the attacks on Iran, starting with attacks on the military assets and infrastructure on the southern coast, right, around the Strait of Hormuz, and then expanding out, now eventually including wider infrastructure. Now, they also are at least intending to reinstitute their blockade of Iranian ports as well, although that wasn't entirely successful the first time, and I don't expect it to be this time. They have enforced it on at least a few ships. So they've started expanding out with their targeting to hit Iranian infrastructure. And one of those infrastructure things that they're hitting in Iran now seems to be bridges, particularly bridges that essentially link Bandar Abbas, this vital port city, as you said, with the rest of Iran. And that is leading a lot of military analysts to speculate the reason for such a thing. And you could simply say they're trying to put strain on military logistics going in the direction of the Strait of Hormuz. But another possibility is that they are seriously considering some type of ground operation. And Bandar Abbas would be what they need to seize control of the Strait of Hormuz, along with possibly Harg Island, which Trump seems to have a hard on for some reason, and some other things. The problem with that is the U.S. just does not have the combat forces in the region to do this. They have less than 10,000 real combat troops available. That's not enough to seize Bandar Abbas or Harg Island, much less keep it And I can't imagine how they would maintain logistics to those troops. I just don't see it. I mean, when the US invaded Iraq, they did it with hundreds of thousands of troops, and it was not something that you could hide. It took them months to do it, move the logistics and the munitions and the equipment to facilitate that. The same thing now. They wouldn't be able to do it much faster, and we just haven't seen that yet. So Trump has made some weird comments about yeah, we need a ground invasion, but we could get someone else to do it. Who else? I mean, I can't really see the Saudi and UAE monarchies sending large numbers of troops. Not that they have such large numbers on a suicide squad mission into some type of beachhead in Bandar Abbas or Harg Island. No, that's not serious. That's not going to happen. UAE may get involved on the edges, right? Because they've become involved again, and we now know that they were involved during the whole first hot phase as well. But they don't have significant military forces. And by the way, one of the retaliatory strikes, because Iran has started hitting back at infrastructure, evidently they hit a military academy in Kuwait. So that's an interesting escalation as well. I just don't see a ground up, nothing sane. Now, I acknowledge that there is a problem in being too logical and rational with regards to the Trump administration, because they are not logical or rational in many of their decisions. So there's always the possibility that the military could just go along with whatever insane plan they cook up and send troops on a suicide mission. All I'm going to say is, if they did do that, if they sent a few thousand troops into Harg Island or Bandar Abbas or Kishem or anything like that, we should welcome that, because they will be destroyed. And that would be a huge blow to the hegemon, to the prestige, to Trump, to Trump's presidency personally. If they were stupid enough to do something like that, we should goad them on. I don't think that the U.S. military will allow themselves. The U.S. Navy is not allowing themselves Trump to order them into the Strait of Hormuz. So I don't imagine the Marines are going to be much more susceptible to suicide missions either. So I just don't see that. And there have not been any serious attempts to activate potential insurgent groups like the Kurds, who are the Iranian Kurds, are mostly in Iraq, and or the a lot of media of the Baluchi, potential Baluchi insurgents southeast. I had considered before the conflict started that those were possibilities, but everything I have seen in the past 4 months has told me that the CIA, Mossad, whatever, has not done the necessary groundwork to train, arm, incite these forces that would have been needed to be done to properly utilize them as proxies. It would have been possible, but they haven't done the work. If they had, they would have already used them. So I'm not really worried. And Iran keeps reaching out and tapping the Kurds in Iraq, like once or twice a week still. Yeah, there are Iranian attacks against Kurdish insurgent formations in the Kurdish region of Iraq. The specific opposition insurgent groups from Iran and so forth. So that's a regular thing. So they're like, you want to say, pruning or cutting the grass, making sure that there isn't anything that is capable of being risen up to being a threat there. So what does that leave? I don't see. I recognize the potential danger of strikes on bridges and what that could mean, but I just don't see any movement or critical mass of troops that would be necessary to do that. Maybe they want to scare the Iranians, and Trump is all about bluff. We know that. Occasionally he does follow through, but a lot more of what he says is just bluff that he never does follow through on. And I just don't believe that there's currently any possibility of any serious, sane military option on the ground in Iran. I can't see it. So what does that leave the U.S. with? Strikes, just a punishment campaign, hoping that they do enough punishment to Iran that they will start acceding to U.S. demands, which is what they tried and failed to do during the first 40 days of the hot phase of the conflict. And we know they have less standoff munitions now, and that Iran's air defense stood a lot stronger than many people, including me, expected it to. So it really leaves Trump again with no good options. And I think it's actually beneficial for Iran to return to this hot phase of the conflict. Because during this period of the ceasefire and then the memorandum of understanding, the U.S. was doing a lot to subvert it and to erode away Iran's leverage and control of the strait. Now we're setting everything back. And as time goes on and there's increasing shortages to the global energy market, that all plays in Iran's favor. And the U.S. has not been able at all to refill its strategic petroleum reserve. So we're not even operating on a timetable like we did before. The timetable to precipice level global energy crisis is much closer than it was last time. So I'm not saying that at the end of this, that the U.S. is going to come to another memorandum of understanding and actually follow through on it. I don't believe that's possible. I don't believe that the U.S. can be trusted that way. I think eventually what Iran must instead focus on is coming to a modus vivendi, a method of understanding with the Gulf Arab states themselves. They have to peel them off to some extent from the United States, because otherwise we're just going to be stuck in a perpetual low-level, long-range strike conflict in the Middle East, in and around the Strait of Hormuz, and with no sign of that ever ending. It can't give the U.S. what it needs to save face and walk away from the situation. So the best we can hope for is that it kind of subsides into low-level conflict, and that Iran reaches some understanding with the Gulf Arab states that slowly freezes the U.S. out of the situation and allows them to limp away and